everyone. Thanks for stopping by the Time We Discuss studio. Today I'm speaking with Cassandra, and it's time we discuss what it's like to be an equity analyst. Cassandra, welcome to Time We Discuss.
Well, thank you for having me.
When I think of an equity analyst, I think of two things. One is more of a trader. You know, you're on Wall Street, you're looking at charts, you're finding buyers, sellers, you might be going long, you might be shorting the market. I also think about, pick a news station and you have a correspondent talking about the financial health of various companies. Now, I have no idea if either of these cover what an equity analyst actually does, but
Right,
fortunately, you do. So,
right.
Cassandra, tell us, what is a typical day like for an equity analyst?
Well, it's probably not as sexy as the first one you described. It's probably more a little bit like the second. It is, well, A, you have to love numbers. B, you actually have to enjoy talking to people and communicating because you are on a daily basis communicating with so many different constituencies. You're communicating with the brokers in your firm that you are articulating why you like a certain company. You're talking to management teams of the companies that you follow. And then you're talking to your colleagues. So those three very different groups, right off the bat. But your day starts early. You're talking about getting to work somewhere around 7:30, 8 o'clock at the latest, probably a little earlier, 7:30. And you've got to know already what's going on in the world. If there's any news that's come out overnight about the companies that you follow, and have an opinion on what that means if there is. So that you got to be a quick thinker, act fast. Which is generally the way every position within the investment community would be, right? You have to be a fast thinker.
So, Cassandra, can you give me an example of something that happened in the past
Uh-huh.
when you were doing this, where something happened overnight and you had to communicate some kind of change to the various constituents?
Sure, that's easy. So there would be overnight a merger announced, right? And so it was easier when, let's say, your company was being acquired and it was for cash, right? But if they were being acquired for stock by the buying company, that stock, there was a ratio. So for every, let's say, one share, you're getting 2.5 shares, right? So you would have to figure out what that really meant dollar wise, right? And was it truly a good deal for the company or not? So you'd have to quickly do those calculations and then you'd have to relay that, in a note and then verbally, as well as see if there were any arbitrage opportunities between the buying price and where the stock was trading at. Maybe there's a few cents in there that somebody could actually trade on right now. Believe it or not, people will do that because they'll buy a lot of shares and those nickels will add up. That would be a great example.
Do you typically have to work in New York City for this? I'm assuming there are firms all over the country, maybe even all over the world that do this. So that's not a
Right.
non-issue now?
It's not as much of an issue now. No, there had been a couple of jobs that I was offered along the way that were from very reputable companies, and however, they were in the World Trade Center. Interestingly, my boss at the time, his name was Larry, and Larry had worked in the World Trade Center when the parking lot bomb went off. And he described to us how he had to walk down all those flights of stairs and just, the chaos. And he said, I will never work there again.
When I'm talking to different people, one thing I like to do is try to identify different barriers for people that they might find a particular aspect of the occupation not up to their liking. So if you don't like working on the 70th floor of a building,
Right.
this might not be for you. Now,
Right.
what is remote work like in 2024 for equity analysts? Do people have the opportunity to work remote a lot? And this is probably just from your experience. Now, obviously, it
Oh,
could
yeah.
change.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely a lot easier. Even, my company that I sold last year, we had people all over the country for long before COVID started. So, I think having good technology and using things like Teams and Zoom and network drives makes it very easy now to be wherever you want. And so it's not an issue anymore. And even interviewing companies, which is what a lot of analysts have to do, even all can be done through Zoom. You don't have to physically get on a plane a lot of times now and go places. Although
Okay.
you probably can if you still want, but it's definitely not as much travel as it used to be.
Now, earlier you talked about paying attention to the news when things happen overnight. You need to be ready to act on that. Um, what other things what other information do you take in that helps you analyze different companies?
I believe very strongly in that it's very important to get as much information direct from the source as possible, direct from the company, not third party, not through your Bloomberg terminal, but really from the company's own investor relations website, from their own news releases, because then there's no twist. It's fact and there's no opinion there,
That
right?
makes sense.
Because it's really important, and this is part of the reason why I've started the app that I have been developing now, is because it's really important, I think, for people to make up their own minds about a company. Yes, I was paid as a sell side analyst to have the opinions on some level, but I'm going to be honest and tell you that one of the things that happens is you're handed a list of companies and said you're going to follow these companies because the investment bank you work for has some sort of relationship with those companies. You're not truly independent. That's the part behind the curtain that a lot of people don't realize. And yes, there have been changes to the regulations over the years to have more of a line drawn there. But the reality is that you're still gonna have to cover what the company is, has as a customer base, right? So if somebody is going to do an IPO, and your company's doing the IPO, when they become public, you're following that company, right? Whether you good, bad, or indifferent, you're going to have an opinion. You're going to be very careful about, if you don't like the company, how you couch that you don't like the company.
Is it possible for people to do this? I don't want to say like as a freelance, but as almost like a small company. Do people ever like look outsource for equity analysts? Does that ever happen?
There is a little bit of that starting to happen. There are strictly, let's call it, research firms out there that consider themselves completely independent. They don't have an investment banking tie, but they're really more for institutional investors to utilize because they're charging big money. Obviously, it costs quite a bit of time and skilled people in order to produce high quality research. So,
Going back before, you talked about that you're kind of tied to the hours of the stock market, generally speaking.
yeah.
Is it a safe assumption to say that um, this is strictly I'm going to say 9 to 5 job, even though the hours could fluctuate, 8 to 4, whatever. But is there a lot of people like working outside of those hours? Are they pulling 60-hour weeks, or is it no? They're with the stock market, 9 to 5 or whatever.
No, if you want to be a really good analyst, which eventually can lead to becoming a portfolio manager if you want to go down that route, or you can just stay being an equity analyst, but the better you are and the longer you're in it, the more money you're going to make. The reality is it's not a 40-hour work week. It is closer to a 60-hour work week, especially if you care. I mean, you have to remember that. I remember the first time I wrote a research piece. It was on some little bank, and I had to put a price target on the stock. And I thought, and I had to say if it was a buy, sell, or a hold. And in my mind, all I was thinking was, what if some little old lady is out there reading this and she's deciding to buy this stock based on my recommendation? Oh my God, like I better be right. And so if you want to be right more often times, I mean, hey, at the end of the day, nobody's going to be perfect track record. We have no control, right? Anything can happen at any given time. But at least you can do your best to make sure that you've looked at every possible thing you can in coming up with your decision. And so that takes time.
Going back to what I said before, the very beginning, when I gave my thoughts of what I thought this job was like, do you ever work with, I believe they're called technical analysts, the people
Mhm.
that actually look at the charts, they look for patterns. Do equity analysts ever work with them, or are they still just kind of completely different things? They don't really work together at all.
That's a whole other skill. I mean, there's some really strong technical analysts out there. And I have a lot of respect over the years for some of them that, were pretty well known in the industry. And you may not work directly with them, but you will certainly listen to what they're saying, maybe about where we are with the overall market right now. The thing that people forget is you can have a really good company and love the company and think it's the greatest company, but that doesn't mean today is the day to buy the stock, right? You have to look at the bigger picture. And yeah, even though I'm not a chartist or a technical analyst, a fundamental analyst, I look at the fundamentals of the company. I would be ignorant if I didn't pay attention to what their chart looks like.
So fascinating. It's so fascinating how it all kind of ties together.
It does, yeah. Yeah, I'll
So
tell you, it was definitely eye-opening to me when I first started at how much you needed to know about a lot of different things.
what are holidays and time off? What does that typically look like for an equity analyst? If you're out for surgery or something, what does that look like for the person?
What I can say is that your only real mental day off is a day that the stock market is closed. So that means national holidays like Christmas, New Year's, things like 4th of July, any other day that you are off because you're sick, you had surgery, you're on vacation, um, you may think, well, I don't have to pay attention. But if you don't pay attention at all, at least for this is me personally, I'm sure there are others out there that may have a better balanced approach. But for the last 25 years, I basically never had a true vacation, even if I went to Europe or Hawaii, because that's what I would do. So I would be in totally different time zones where I could actually have the day free before the market really opened at home, etc. You still are paying attention a little bit.
Switching gears entirely, education. What is your education background like, and has
Mhm.
that tied directly into what you did as an equity analyst?
I'll tell you, my undergraduate, I went to Lafayette College and I actually did not take any business or finance courses. I was government and law. I was going to law school and I actually did start out going to law school. And interestingly, once I was in law school, I started really just becoming very interested in the stock market. I would come home, CNBC was in its infancy, and I would come home and watch, and I was very fascinated by the terminology. And I started reading the Wall Street Journal, and I thought, wow, this is because I always had an interest in stocks, but all I knew was stockbroker, and I knew I didn't want to be that. And so I left law school and I went and I got my MBA. And it was a 2-year program at the University of Miami. It was 2 years because obviously I had no undergraduate classes in it, but it was a very good program. And I got a lot of skills. Not only I felt real life skills, like actually how to use at the time Microsoft Office, Excel, and things like that. It gave me enough that I could get a job, but this is a lot of learning on the job, sink or swim.
Now, if someone is looking to transition into this sort of career,
Mhm.
what kind of do they need to go back for an MBA if they don't have one? Do they just need a bachelor's in economics and finance? Could they just have a bachelor's in history and make it happen by
Mhm.
working on the job? What, in your experience, what does that look like for someone transitioning?
You know, if they want to walk into Goldman Sachs, probably going to be tough, right? Without having, you know, some experience, or at least if you're already out of school and had done things and now you want to go back into this new career, you probably do need an MBA. But I would say, you know, if you're right out of college, you can go and start from the bottom floor in companies that are that large. You know, they're recruiting every year. But if you are not interested in being, you know, right there on Wall Street, but you just want to be in this industry, you can do it as long as you've got certain skills. Certainly have to like numbers, Excel, and now probably coding, Python coding, which is sort of the next, you know, better than Excel. But also you have to prove that you really have a love for the stock market and a feel for it. I've hired people that have all of the skills, all of the credentials, but they just didn't have a feel for the market. And that's not something that can really be taught.
You mentioned Python, so that's very interesting. That the
Uh-huh.
coding aspect is finding its way into this realm.
Mhm.
In what capacity is the coding working with this? What are people doing with the coding?
I didn't really know anything about coding until a couple of years ago. I had hired an intern and I was asking him to get me a list of the earnings calendar. It was going to be earnings season. And I said, here's a list of stocks. I want their earnings calendar dates. And you know, I was used to putting it in, going, and it would take me a couple hours to do that one by one. He's like, oh, okay, I'll write a little code and I'll get it for you. And within like an hour, I had my list. And I was like, how did you do that? And he's like, oh, I just used some Python code. And so I started kind of reading about this and I was like, wow, you know what? Maybe I need to learn this, like, because what can this really do for me, you know? So I did, I went and I took a boot camp and I realized the power that Python code, how much time savings it was giving me, just by merely the few lines of code could generate, you know, a whole chart on, you know, a heat map or the correlation between, you know, an entire portfolio. I mean, just totally geeky stuff that nobody else in the world would care about. But I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I tell everyone I know that has kids that are going to school, make sure they learn how to code. Even if they never use it, you have to know the power that it has so that if you have ideas, even if you're telling somebody else, go do the coding, you know what it can do.
I completely agree with you, Cassandra. I am a developer by trade,
Okay.
so I can really geek out when it comes to working with APIs and pulling
Oh
data
yeah,
and merging
yeah.
data and just doing all kinds of things. I
Uh-huh.
hear exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So going back to working the hours and stuff like that. What is burnout like for people in this industry? Is it a high turnover rate? I'm assuming it probably is, but what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, it can be pretty high turnover rate, burnout. I mean, I think that you find a lot of people will do it for a few years and then try to transition either into portfolio management, investment management, or they may go work for one of the companies they were following, or go into investor relations, because it is, I mean, you're tied to not only the daily stock market being open, but 4 times a year you have earnings come out. So you are basically tied to that earnings calendar. And that gets kind of old after a while. Yeah.
I can only imagine. It almost reminds me of like an accountant during tax season. All of a sudden
That's,
it's like it's
yep,
crunch time.
yep. Oh, it's like that, only it's 4 times a year.
So if you're an accountant and you're not getting enough of that, go into equity
Right.
analyst.
There you go.
So not to be all doom and gloom, but I'm assuming
Huh?
it's probably also pretty a pretty profitable occupation as well, right? Could be pretty lucrative if you do well.
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. It absolutely can. Not like it used to be. And there's regulatory reasons behind that. I mean, it used to be where you would get, if you were the analyst and you were following a stock that uh, the company you worked for, um, it was a client, and a lot of the brokers in your firm were selling shares of that stock, you would get a piece of the revenues generated from all of that trading revenue. That can't happen anymore.
Cassandra, this is the part of the show where I like to throw a surprise question at the person I'm speaking with. It
Okay.
has absolutely nothing to do with your job.
Okay.
So your question for today, I remember going as far back as when I was a young adult, and invariably the question comes up, are you a dog person or are you a cat person?
Hmm.
Now, taking dogs and cats off the table, what kind of person are you?
I would say that I am a mutt because I've got a little bit of cat and a little bit of dog, I guess you could say. Um, and the reason I say that is you, I personally just, and maybe it's a function of, what I've done for a living all these years, is you have to be versatile, you have to be quick, you have to be an alpha. Um, and if, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, and you have to keep your nose sniffing to find the next morsel.
I love it. I love the comparison. One last thing before we sign off, I'd like to give the person that I'm speaking with the opportunity to plug a project they're working on, a cause they believe in, a charity, something like that. So, Cassandra, if there's something that you would like to talk about, the floor is yours.
Well, I appreciate that. So I would say, I kind of alluded to this earlier. I've started a new venture called Firsthand Research and Consulting, and we're developing right now a SaaS that is for consumers and, well, primarily consumers. And it's really to present thoughtful, in a thoughtful, non-mathematical way, complex ideas and facts in non-math for people that don't or are intimidated by math, but they're interested in investing. And so I had been thinking about this for a while, and knowing all of what I know, I finally figured out how to make it happen. So I'm pretty excited about that. We're going to go into beta launch soon. You can check out the website firsthand with one ST, handresearch.com, and you can even sign up to be an early tester.
That's awesome. I'll make sure I get
Yeah.
the URL from you, and I'll put that in the description notes so people have access to that and they can check it out and sign up to be beta testers if that's what they want to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Cassandra, thank you so much for joining me today on Time We Discuss as we talked about what it's like to be an equity analyst.
Well, thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Thanks for popping in the studio. My name is Dan, and this is Time We Discuss. I really enjoyed speaking with Cassandra, and I hope you enjoyed the time too. If you want to find more about her company or her app or want to be a beta tester, make sure you check out the links in the description. If there's a profession that you want me to cover, add a comment and I'll find that person for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. That'll do it. See you next time on Time We Discuss.